The night it happened, Tessa Quinn was standing on my kitchen tile with no shoes on, worn down to almost nothing, whispering that nobody could ever want her, and holding her own ribs like she expected them to give way. I'll get to what I said back, but the whole thing only makes sense if I reverse the clock back to the week she came home. I'm Owen Rhodes, 36 years old, and I keep a little shop up on a lake in the north of Michigan, where I rebuild docks and shapeboat trim out of cedar. My days don't ask much of me. Sawdust in my sleeves, a tape measure clipped to my belt, a mug of coffee I forget until it's stone cold, and customers who tell me they want the wood to look aged, and then flinch when it actually does. It's a small, dependable, unsurprising sort of living, and maybe that's exactly why her coming back knocked me sideways the way it did. She and I went all the way back to when we were 11. We grew up on the same stretch of shoreline, sat in the same classrooms, sweated through the same lousy summer jobs handing cones to sunburned tourists. She started out as my kid sister Katie's best friend, then became mine because she was always around, and eventually mine because I picked her. Tessa was the person whose laugh you heard before you found her in a crowd. She told stories with every muscle in her face, reached across the table to swipe your fries, and informed you in the same breath that your playlist was a war crime. At 27, she'd packed up for Chicago, landed a job doing brand work, and gotten herself engaged to a man called Grant, a guy with a costly watch, and the look of somebody who'd never once been disappointed in himself. At 32, she drove back to the lake with an empty passenger seat. I only knew any of it because Katie phoned me before 8 on a Thursday and opened with, "Whatever you do, don't say something dumb the first time you see her." That's an oddly precise thing to be told. She set up over at her mom's for now, Owen. Something in Katie's tone bit. There was a surgery, and Grant is out of the picture. That straightened me up. Surgery for what? A pause on her end. Breast cancer. Early enough that she got lucky, but the whole thing put her through the ringer. She's not handing out the specifics, so zip it and act like a normal human. Act normal. Folks toss that off like it costs nothing. It costs plenty. Not when a person you used to be able to identify by her laugh alone comes home hauling something so heavy it warps the room she stands in. I ran into her that same afternoon in her mother's driveway. One car door hanging open, 2 moving boxes stacked against her chest. The hair that used to fall dark past her shoulder blades was cropped short now, ending just below her ears. Still lovely, only changed. She'd gone thinner, too, the angles of her more pronounced, and her expression carried a wariness I couldn't remember ever seeing on her. She caught sight of me coming up the drive and produced a smile so rehearsed it made my chest ache. "Hey there, Rhodes." Still my last name. Still like we were 17 and mouthing off in the school lot. I lifted the boxes out of her arms before she could argue the point. "Hey, back. Word is you're a real grown-up living on your own now." "Hardly. I'm subletting a corner of adulthood by the month." That earned me an actual smile. Little, but genuine. I take whatever she gave me. The house on the inside smelled like flattened cardboard and lemon spray. She'd only bothered unpacking the essentials so far. One lamp glowing in a corner, a mug half drunk on the counter, and a row of prescription bottles by the sink, arranged with the careful exactness of somebody working overtime just to stay level. I put the boxes down and told her, "Just aim me at whatever's left, I've got it." "That's not what I said," she answered, her eyes sliding to mine, taking a measurement. "Then, fine. The bookcase." The bookcase became the sofa. The sofa became a pair of kitchen chairs she claimed she could handle on her own. An hour in, I was fighting a painted-shut window in the spare room while Tessa hovered behind me, contributing narration of no earthly use. "You've always needed to feel handy." "I am handy. You're pushy." "You're welcome." Another small smile pried loose. By the time I headed out, she'd folded herself onto the living room floor, ringed by framed pictures she couldn't decide whether to display or bury. One was left over from the engagement session. I could tell because Grant was in it, grinning like a man selling wristwatches. The second she noticed me clock it, she flipped the frame face down. I acted like I hadn't seen a thing. Across the next fortnight, I laid eyes on her more than I had in a stretch of years. At the start, it was only because Katie kept feeding me into it. "Go make sure her porch bulb works. Run this over to her. She's got mulch that won't carry itself." Real slick, my sister. But before long, Katie didn't need to prod me at all. Tessa took to dropping by the shop with 2 coffees. I took to quietly repairing odds and ends at her mom's place that she swore up and down she could manage solo. We fell into a groove far too fast, and that should have set off more alarms in me than it did. The humor was intact, the sharp edges too, and she could still string together a full sentence insult, while passing me a muffin she'd pulled from the oven that morning. But the cracks showed. A harmless question like, "So what's your timeline here? Staying long?" would make her wince. She kept to loose shirts even once the afternoons warmed up. She was careful never to change where a window could see her. And whenever Grant's name surfaced on her phone, buried in some email chain she'd never gotten around to trashing, a little of the light went out of her face. I let it sit, not because I wasn't curious, but because I figured she'd tell me once the telling belonged to her. That night arrived on a Sunday. Katie had gone out somewhere. I was locking up the shop when I spotted Tessa, off by herself on her mother's back steps, one knee hugged to her chest, a blanket draped over her even though the evening wasn't nearly cold enough to earn it. She raised her eyes as I let myself in the gate. "You got any wine on you?" she asked. "That kind of night." A thin, cracked laugh. "Is it written on my face?" I came back about 10 minutes on, carrying a bottle, 2 glasses that didn't match, and a fairly loud instinct that whatever was coming carried more weight than either of us was letting on. She sipped once, fixed her gaze on the backyard, and said, "Can I put a question to you? And can you skip the gentle, careful answer for once?" I settled against the porch railing and studied her. "Have you ever known me to have that kind of self-control?" That drew a warmer laugh out of her, though it burned off quickly. She set the glass down, drew the blanket in closer, and said, barely above a breath, "Owen, when you look at me these days, what is it you actually see?" There was no safe reply to that. She hadn't said it as a trap, but no simple sentence was going to hold up under what she was really after. She wasn't fishing about the haircut. She wasn't fishing about the shadows under her eyes. She was asking me whether the thing that had happened to her was now the first thing every set of eyes landed on. So I didn't rush it. That part counted. People blurt fast when they're chasing the sound of nobility. I took her in on purpose. Bare toes tucked beneath the blanket, that short hair lit at the edges by the porch bulb. One hand curled around a glass. She had no intention of drinking, her stare pinned to me, like she was steeling herself for a mercy that would sting sharper than the truth. "I see Tessa," I told her. Her jaw drew tight. "That's a dodge, not an answer." "It's the answer." "No, that's the line people reach for when they can't stand to name the real one." I lowered myself onto the step below hers, keeping a gap between us. "All right, the real one, then. I see a woman who limped home from the ugliest year of her life, and inside a week was already ribbing me over how I keep my toolbox." A single puff of a laugh escaped her. Faint but real. "I see a woman who insists she doesn't need a hand with the furniture, then plants herself in the doorway, supervising me like some pint-sized job inspector. I see a woman who can still get my sister laughing till she cries, inside about half a minute." I held her eyes. "And sure, I see that you're worn out. And sure, I can tell something cut you deep. But when I look at you, the wound isn't the first thing I find." She kept her focus on the yard. For a long stretch, she said nothing. Then, under her breath, "Grant does." And there it was, the name we'd all been stepping around like it might slice us open. I stayed still. She looked down at her own hands. It wasn't like that in the beginning. At the start, he was flawless. Bouquets, ride to every appointment, the whole "we'll beat this together" routine. He knew every right thing to say. Her mouth pulled sideways. He was a natural at the press release version of standing by someone. That one landed heavier than she probably intended. Then the actual part started. She held her voice flat, which somehow made it land worse. Getting better wasn't graceful. I wasn't good company. I wasn't low maintenance. I stopped matching the picture he had in his head. I ran out of the energy it took to make him feel like a hero for hanging around. My jaw clenched before I could catch it. She caught it anyway. Don't what? Don't sit there looking like you take a 2x4 to his head. I work with lumber. Occupational instinct, nothing personal." The night
that got her one more time.
Tessa Quinn was standing on my kitchen tile with no shoes on, then quiet, worn down to almost nothing, run in one clean whispering that nobody
that at least
could
would have
ever
been
want
honest.
her,
He just
and
got
holding her
busy,
own ribs like she
then
expected
guarded
them
them
to
far
give
away. I'll get to
And
what I
one
said
evening,
back.
I
but the
overheard
whole
him
thing
telling
only
his
makes
brother on
sense
the
if I
phone
reverse the
that he
clock
felt
back
boxed in
to the week she
I
came
looked
home.
down at the porch
I'm
planks,
Owen Rhodes,
not to avoid
36
her,
years
but
old,
because if I met her
and
eyes
I
too
keep a little
soon,
shop up
I
on a
was
lake
worried
in
my
North
anger
Michigan,
would swallow
where
the
I
whole
rebuild
space.
docks and
Tessa was owed something better than my
days
temper.
don't ask much.
He
of
told
me
me he'd lost the
Sawdust in
ability
my
to want me.
sleeves,
She
a
said.
tape measure clipped
The
to my
sentence
belt,
came out
a
level,
mug of coffee
too
I
level,
forget until it's stone
like she'd
cold,
run it enough
and
laps
customers who tell me
through
they
her
want the
mind
wood to look
that it had
aged,
hardened from an
and then
injury
flinch
into
when it actually
plain
does.
fact.
I
It's
made
a
myself
small,
look at her.
dependable,
That's his
unsurprising
failing, not
sort of
yours.
living, and
A
maybe
faint
that's
smile.
exactly why
That's
her
the
coming
generous
back
read.
knocked me
No,
sideways.
that's the
way it
correct
did.
one.
Maybe,
And I went all the way
she
back
tugged
to
the
when
blanket
we were
tighter
11.
across
We
her
grew up on the
shoulders.
same stretch
But
of
correct
shoreline.
doesn't undo
Sat in
what
the
it
same
does to a
classrooms.
person.
When the
Sweated
one
through
who
the
same
same
lousy summer
forever
jobs
starts
handing
treating
you
like
like
a
a
chore
son
they
they
got
got
stuck
stuck
with.
She
She
started
started
out
out
as my
silent.
kid sister Katie's
A few
best
houses
friend,
down a dog
then
let out
became
one
mine
bark.
because she was
A
always
car rolled
around,
by,
unhurried.
eventually mine
Behind
because
us,
I
the
picked her.
ancient fridge
Tessa
droned
was the
on,
person whose laugh you
oblivious
heard
to the
before you
fact
found her
that
in
someone
the
was
crowd.
sitting a few
She
feet
told
off,
stories with
working
every muscle
hard
in her face,
not to come apart.
reached across
There were
the table
100
to
things
swipe
I
your
wanted to hand
fries,
her,
and
he was a
informed you in
coward
the same breath
that
that
she
your
was
playlist
worth
was
10
a
of
war
him.
crime.
That
At 27,
she'd
she'd
been
packed
through
up
made
her
her
Chicago,
any less herself.
landed a job
All of it
doing
true,
brand work,
none of it enough,
and gotten herself
so what I said
engaged
was,
to a man
Tessa,
called Grant.
I'm not him.
A guy with
She
a costly
turned
watch
and really looked at me
and a
then.
look of somebody
I
who
know,
never
she
once
said.
been disappointed.
That's what scares
in
me.
herself.
Something
At
in the air
32,
changed. She drove
not
back
toward
to the lake
romance,
with an empty
exactly.
passenger seat.
Something
I only
riskier
knew
than
any
that,
of it
because
her
Katie
face
phoned me
was
before
carrying
8 on
more than
Thursday
pain
now,
and open
it was
with carrying
whatever
the
you do,
fear of taking
don't say something
comfort
dumb
from
the
the
first
wrong
time
man.
you see her,
Or maybe
that's an
fear
oddly
that
precise
he wasn't
thing
the
to be
wrong
told.
man at all.
She sat up
I got
over
over
at her
feet
mom's
before I
for
could
an
talk
hour,
myself
Owen.
out of it. Something in
Again,
Katie's tone
she
bent.
frowned.
There was a
And go
surgery.
where? And
My
Grant
place
is out of the picture.
You're freezing.
That straightened me
You've
up.
barely eaten.
Surgery for
and
what?
Back porch
A pause on her
confessionals
end.
are murder
Breast
on your
cancer.
circulation.
Early enough
That is
that
the
she
single
got
most
lucky,
unromantic
but the whole
rescue
thing put her
I've
through the
ever
ringer.
heard.
She's not
Perfect.
handing out the
I like
specifics.
to keep expectations
so zip it
manageable
and act like
she
a
rolled her
normal
eyes at
human.
me.
Act
She stood
normal.
up.
Folks
Have you
toss
ever
that
had to
off
work
like
out
it
how to
costs
be
nothing.
there for someone?
It costs plenty.
Without turning
Now
it
a
into a
person
story
you used
about
to be able to
yourself.
identify.
If you
by
have,
her
drop in the
laugh alone.
comments. I
Comes
actually
home
read them.
hauling something
10 minutes
so
on,
heavy
she was
it
perched in my
warps the
kitchen
room.
island.
She stands
Still
in.
wrapped in
I
that
ran into her
blanket
that same
while I
afternoon in
assembled
her
a
mother's
grilled
driveway.
cheese like a
One
surgeon
cart,
under
door
pressure.
hanging open.
She watched
two
me,
moving boxes
tiredly
stacked
amused.
against her chest.
You always start
the hair that
feeding
used to
people
fall
when
dark
something
past her
was
shoulder
rattling
blades
you.
was cropped
Nothing's
short now,
rattling me.
ending just below
Owen,
her ears.
I am filing
Still
a
lovely,
formal
only
note of
changed.
concern.
She'd
That
gone
sounds like
thinner.
something a furniture
Two,
warnie would say.
The angles
I
of
pushed
her
the
more
plate toward her.
pronounced.
Now
Her
eat.
expression
She
carried
took
a
a bite.
wariness I
Let her
couldn't
eyes
remember
fall
ever
shut for
seeing
half
on
a
her.
second.
And
She
said,
caught sight of me
I
coming up
resent
the
how
drive
good this
and produced
is.
a smile.
Turns
so
out panic
rehearsed
makes
it
me
made my
excellent with
chest
bread.
steak.
For a little while,
Hey there,
we pulled
Rhodes.
off ordinary.
Still my last
and it
name.
helped.
Still like
She
you were
finished
17
one half of
and
the
mouthing
sandwich,
off in the school
then the
loft.
other.
I lifted
Then
the boxes
eased back,
out of her arms,
steadier,
before
though
she
something
could
still
argue the
sat
point.
lodged
Hey,
beneath
back.
her ribs.
Word is you're a real
unspoken.
grown-up.
I rinsed
living
the
on your
pan
own
now.
She stared at the
Hardly.
countertop.
I'm
Then she
subletting
said,
a corner of
would it be
adulthood
okay
by
if I
the
showed
month.
you something? That earned me an
The way it
actual
came
smile.
out made me
Little,
shut the tap
but
off on the
genuine.
spot.
I take
You're
whatever
not
she gave me.
obligated to.
The house on
I
the
know.
inside
I mean it,
smelled
though.
like
I
flattened
know,
cardboard
she
and
said
lemon
again.
spray. That's the
She'd
reason
only
I'm asking
bothered
you,
unpacking
and not
the
somebody
essentials
else.
so far.
I dried my
One
hands
lamp
without hurrying
glowing in a
and
corner,
turned to face her.
a mug half
Tessa had
drunk
come
on
to
the
stand
counter,
by the island
and a
now.
row of
The
prescription
blanket
bottles by the
sliding off
sink,
one shoulder.
arranged with the careful
Her face had gone
exactness of
colorless,
somebody working
but
overtime.
her eyes
just
held
to stay
steady.
level. In the
I put the
bravest
boxes down
and
and
saddest
told her,
way at once.
just aim me at whatever's
She lifted
left.
the bottom
I've got
edge
it.
of that loose
That's not what
shirt,
I said.
just far
She
enough to let me
answered,
see
her
where her
eyes
body had been
sliding
altered.
to mine,
Not for
taking a
effect,
measurement,
not to
Then
draw
fine.
pity,
The
just to be
bookcase.
honest.
I
I didn't
The
hold
bookcase
look.
became the sofa.
I held it exactly
The sofa
long
became a
enough
pair
to
of kitchen
grasp
chairs.
what
She
that
claimed
trust
she
had
could
cost her.
handle on her own.
Then my eyes
An hour
climbed back
in,
to her face.
I was fighting a
where they
painted
belonged.
shut window
Her
in the
mouth
spare room,
quivered
while
once
Tessa
before she
hovered
got it under
behind
control.
me.
Contributing
In a voice
narration
so
of
faint it
no
hardly
earthly
crossed the
use.
room, Tessa
You've always
breathed,
needed to feel
"Nobody
handy.
wants me."
I
I didn't
handy.
react right
You're
away.
pushy. Not
You're
from
welcome.
any lack of
Another
wanting
small
to, but
smile
because it hit
pried
me all
loose.
at once.
By the
that
time
this
I
was the
headed
kind of
out,
moment a
she'd
man
folded
can
herself
wreck
onto the
simply
living
by
room
moving
floor,
too fast,
ringed by framed
too fast
pictures
to
she
comfort,
couldn't decide
too fast
whether
to
to
glance
display or
away.
bury.
Too
One was
fast
left
to
over
reach
from the
for
engagement
tidy,
session.
noble
I could
line
tell
that
because
sounds
Grant was in
lovely,
it
and
grinning
means
like a
nothing.
man selling wristwatches.
Tessa stayed there against the
The
counter
second
with her
she noticed
shirt
me clock
still
it,
raised at the
she
hem.
flipped the frame
only enough
face
to lay
down.
bare the truth.
I acted like I hadn't
She'd been
seen a
lugging
thing.
around like
Across
a
the next
sentence handed
fortnight,
down in court.
I laid
I
eyes
found her
on her
face
more
again
than
the way I
had in a
always
stretch of
did.
years.
Her eyes
At the
had
start it was
filled,
only
but
because
she was fighting the
Katie
tears
kept
back,
feeding me into it.
as though even
Go make
falling
sure her
apart
porch
had to be
bulb
handled
works.
with manners.
Run this over to her.
Nobody wants me.
She's got mulch
she
that
said
won't
once
carry
more,
itself.
softer now,
Real slick,
like
my
the
sister.
first time it cost her.
But before
and a
long,
second
Katie
might
didn't
set it
need
in
to prod
stone.
me at all. I closed
Tessa
the
took
distance
to dropping
between
by the
us
shop
on
with 2
unhurried.
coffees.
Not close
I took
enough
to
to
quietly
boss her in,
repairing odds,
not close enough to make
and
her
ends at
feel
mom's
cornered,
place.
only
But she
close
swore
enough
up and
that she'd
down she could
understand
manage
I had
solo.
no plans to
We fell
walk
into a
out of the room.
groove
Then I
far
said
too
it.
fast.
I do. She
And
went rigid.
That should have
The
set
shirt
off more
dropped from her
alarms in me
fingers
than it did.
and settled back
The
down.
humor was intact.
For one beat,
the sharp
neither of
edges
us
too
managed a full
and she could
breath.
still string together
Tessa
a full
stared at me
sentence
like I'd
insult.
spoken in some tongue.
While passing me
She
a
was
muffin
scared to
she pulled
translate.
from the oven that
Oh,
morning.
but the
I do.
cracks showed. I repeated,
A harmless question
lower
like,
this time.
"So what's your
And
timeline
I need
here?
you to take it the
Staying
way I
long?"
mean it. Would
Not
make
because
her
I
wince.
pity you.
She kept
Not
to
because
loose
I'm playing
shirts
hero,
even once the
dragging you
afternoons
clear
warmed up.
of one
She was careful
cruel
never
thing
change
Grant
where a
left
window
rattling
could see her.
around in your head.
And whenever
I kept
Grant's
my eyes
name
locked
surfaced
on
on her
hers.
phone, I want you.
Buried in some
genuine
email
chain,
the exhausted
she'd
you,
never gotten
the
around to
furious you,
trashing. The one who
a little
polices
of the
my
light
grilled
went out of her
cheese,
face.
like a health
I let it
inspector on
sit.
the clock.
Not because I
The one
wasn't
who came back
curious,
home changed,
but because I figured
and still
she'd tell
crosses
me
a room
once the telling
like the
belonged
floor
to
was
her.
laid for her.
That night
Something
arrived
in her
on a
face
Sunday.
buckled.
Katie had gone out
somewhere.
somewhere.
Not
I
entirely.
was locking up the shop
just
when I
enough to
spotted
tell me
Tessa
it had gotten through
off
the
by
armor.
herself on her mother's
None of that
back
needs
steps.
saying.
She
One knee
whispered.
hugged her
I
chest.
hear you. A
No,
blanket
listen,
draped
you don't owe
over
me a
her,
repair
even
job
though the
on
evening
this.
wasn't
I'm not
nearly
patching
cold enough to
anything.
earn it. I said.
She raised her
I
eyes
took one
as
more
I let
step,
myself in the
still
gate.
leaving her room.
You got any wine
I'm
on
only
you?
laying
She
the
asked.
truth in front of
That
you.
kind of night.
She gave her
A
head
thin,
one
cracked
hard
laugh.
shake.
Is it
Angry
written on
now,
my
though
face?
not at me. I came
At
back
hope
about
itself.
10 minutes on
At how
carrying
dangerous
a bottle,
it felt to
two
trust a
glasses
kind
that didn't
thing.
match.
After somebody
and a
had
fairly
drilled
loud
the
instinct that
distrust
whatever
into
was
her.
coming carried
You haven't
more
seen the
weight
whole of
than
it, she
either
said.
of us was letting
I don't need to take inventory
sipped
to know
once,
exactly
fixed her
who's in
gaze
front
on a
of me.
black yard.
Let's stop her
and
cold.
said,
I
"Can
brought
I
my
put a
voice
question
down
to you?
soft.
And can
Tessa,
you skip the gentle,
your body
careful
survived
answer
something
for once?"
savage.
I
That
settled
doesn't
against
turn
the
it into a
porch
caution
railing
sign.
and studied her.
It doesn't shrink
Have
how
you
much
ever
you're
known
wanted.
me to have that
It
kind
doesn't
of
shave
self-control?
off a single ounce
That
of the
drew a
woman you
warmer
are.
laugh out of
And
her,
it damn
though
well
it
burned
doesn't
off
give
quickly.
Grant
She set the
permission
glass down
to be the voice
drew
you
the
hold
blanket
yourself
closer,
up against,
and said,
she looked
barely
off to the
above
side
breath,
then.
A
"Owen,
single tear.
when you look at me
finally
these
broke
days,
loose.
what is
And
it
she
you
swiped
actually
away
see?"
fast. There was no
half
safe
annoyed
reply
by
to
it.
that. I hate
She
that I
hadn't
can
said
still
it as a
hear his
trap,
voice,
but
she
no
said.
simple
I
sentence
know.
was going
I
to
can be
hold
steady
up
for hours
under what she was
and then it's
really
one
after.
mirror.
She
One
wasn't
shirt,
fishing about
one
the
dumb
haircut.
little memory.
She wasn't
and I'm
fishing
back
about
in
the
it.
shadows
Her voice
under her
wavered.
eyes.
Back watching
She was
the
asking
second
me
his face
whether the
turn.
thing that had happened
That cracked
to her
something loose
was
in
now
me.
the first thing
Not with
every
any
set of
noise.
eyes landed on.
Just enough, so I didn't
I
rush
put my
it.
hand out,
That part
palm
counted.
open,
People
letting the
blurt
choice be
fast
hers.
when they're
She
chasing
looked
down
down
the
at
sound of nobility.
Then, after a
I took her
drawn
in
out
on
beat,
purpose.
she set her
bare
hand in
toes
mine.
tucked beneath
Her
the
fingers had
blanket.
gone cold.
That short
I
hair
closed
lit
both
at
of
the
mine
edges
around
by
them
the porch
and told
bowl.
her. One
Then we
hand
make a
curled
new
around
one.
a glass.
A new
She
memory.
had no intention
Her
of
eyes
drinking.
lifted to meet
Her
mine.
stare pinned to
What?
me.
Not all
Like
of it.
she was stealing
Not
herself
tonight.
for a mercy
Just this
that would
part.
sting
I
sharper
gave her
than
hand
truth.
a gentle press.
I see Tessa.
You showed me
I
the
told
thing
her.
you were most
Her
afraid
jaw
to show
drew
anybody.
tight.
That's a
And
dodge.
I'm still
not an
standing
answer.
right here.
It's the
That's
answer
what we hold on to.
No. She
That's
held
the
my eyes a
line
moment.
people reach
Then a
for when
small,
they can't stand
broken
to name
laugh
the
got
real
out of
one.
her. I
And
lowered
folded
myself onto the
straight
step
into a
below
sob
hers,
before she could catch it,
keeping a gap.
I didn't
between
gather
us.
her in right away.
All right,
The
I'll let her
real
come
one.
then.
When she
I
was the
see a
one
woman
who
who limped
forward,
home from the
I wrapped her
ugliest
up,
year of her
steady
life.
and sure, and
Pulled her
inside
not
a
like
week
she'd
was already
shatter,
ribbing me
but like she was
over how
worth
I
keeping
keep my
whole.
toolbox.
There's a difference
A
between
single
those.
puff of a
She
laugh
buried her
escaped
face
her.
in my shirt,
faint but
and let
real.
it all go.
I see a
The
woman
way
who
people
insists
finally
she
do
doesn't need a hand
after they
with the
spent
furniture,
months clamping
then
it
plant
down
herself
because
in
they
the
were certain
doorway,
that breaking would make them
supervising
too
me
much
like
to
some
love.
pint-sized
I
job
laid my
inspector.
cheek lightly on her
I
hair.
see a woman who
and
can
kept
still get my
quiet for a
sister
while.
laughing till
Not
she
everything
cries.
calls for a speech.
Inside about
Some
half
things
a
just
minute.
call for a person
I held her
who
eyes.
stays.
And sure,
a few minutes and
I
she
see that you're
pulled
worn
back,
out,
sheepish.
and sure,
I'm
I
sorry.
can tell something cut
Don't
you
be.
deep.
I
But
soaked
when I
your
look
shirt.
at you,
It's
the
lived
wound
through
isn't
worse.
the first thing I find.
Worse how, sawdust?
She kept her focus on the
Sawdust.
yard.
Coffee.
For a long stretch,
There's an
she said
unfortunate
nothing.
episode.
Then,
with stained
under her
weave,
breath,
all
Grant
agreed
does.
never to mention.
And there it was.
A weak laugh.
The name we'd
worked
all
its
been
way out
stepping
of her.
around like
Good.
it might slice
I'd
us
bank
open.
every last
I stayed
one.
still.
She dragged
She
the
looked down at
blanket
her own
sleeve across her
hands.
face and
It wasn't
glanced
like that
around
in
my
the beginning.
kitchen. At the
Like she
start,
was
he
reaching for
flawless.
solid, familiar
Bouquets,
objects before
ride
the
to
whole
every
moment
appointment
got too
the whole
large to
beat
stand
this together
beside.
routine.
Then she said,
He knew every
I ought to
right
head
thing
home.
to say.
You can.
Her mouth,
but I don't
pulled
think that's what you
sideways.
want.
He
She
was a
looked at me,
natural
caught
at the
out.
press release
I don't want to be
version
by
of
myself
standing
tonight,
by
she
someone.
admitted.
That
That
one
somehow
landed heavier
was the
than
bravest
she probably
thing she'd
intended.
said all
Then
evening.
the actual part
I tipped my
started.
head toward
She
the
held her
hall.
voice flat.
The spare room,
which somehow
already
made
set.
it land worse.
She searched my face.
Getting better wasn't
Promise you
graceful.
won't make this
I was a good
strange.
company. I make no guarantees about my breakfast.
I stopped matching the picture
Emotionally
he had in his
only.
head.
No,
I ran out of the
small
energy
smile.
it took
Real
to make
this
him
round.
feel like a hero.
She took the spare
hanging
room,
around,
tucked
my
under
jaw
an old
clenched
quilt of
before
my
I could catch
sister's
it.
with the door.
She
left
caught it
ajar.
anyway.
Don't.
I stretched out on the
Don't what?
couch.
Don't
and
sit there
stayed
looking
awake
like
far
you take a
longer than I
2x4.
needed to. The night it
Listening
happened,
to the house
Tessa
tick and
Quinn
settle.
was standing on
Turning
my
over
kitchen
the
tile
fact
with
that
no
she'd
shoes on,
handed me the
worn
exact
down
spot
to almost nothing,
where another man had convinced
whispering
her
that
she was
nobody
worthless.
could ever
Come
want her,
daylight,
and
everything
holding her
would have
own
to be
ribs like she
handled
expected
more
them to give
gently,
way.
more
I'll get to what I
deliberately,
said back,
more
but the whole
truthfully.
thing only makes
Because
sense
once you
if I
tell
reverse
somebody
the
I
clock
do,
back
while
to
they're
the week she
standing in
came
the middle
home.
of their deepest
I'm Owen
fear,
Rhodes. You don't get to
36
shrug
years
afterward
old,
and call
and
it a friendly
I keep a little
gesture.
shop up on a lake
And I
in
had
the north
no
of Michigan,
interest in shrugging,
where I rebuild
Morning
docks
showed up
and
without
shape
any
boats from out of
fanfare.
cedar.
No
My days
golden
don't ask much of me.
sunrise,
No
sawdust
swelling
in my
music,
sleeves,
just
a
a
thin
tape
gray
measure clipped to my
light
belt,
between the
a
blinds,
mug of
the
coffee
smell
I
of
forget
coffee,
until it's stone
and
cold,
Tessa in my hallway
and
wearing
customers
an
who tell
old
me they want the
sweatshirt
wood
of
to look
mine over her
aged,
sleep shorts,
and then flinch
looking like
when it
someone
actually
who'd
does.
rested deeper
It's a
than
small,
she'd braced
dependable,
for, and
unsurprising
still not as much
sort
as
of
she
living.
needed. And maybe
I was
that's
at the
exactly
stove,
why her coming
losing
back
a slow
knocked me
argument
with the
with
way
the
it
bags.
did.
She propped herself
and I
in
went
the
all the way
doorway
back
and
to
said,
when we were 11.
"You cook like
we
you're
grew up on
haggling
the same
with the
stretch of
skillet.
shoreline.
I'm ahead on
Sat
point.
in the same classrooms.
You're nowhere near
Sweated
ahead.
through the same
That was the
lousy
first
summer
good sign of the
jobs,
day.
handing cones
Not
to
the
sunburned
eggs,
tourists,
which were mixed
She
results.
started out as
Her
my kid
voice,
sister Katie's best
scratchy,
friend,
then
tired,
became
but
mine
back to
because
being
she was
hers.
always around.
She slid onto a
and
stool
eventually
while I
mine
set a
because
plate
I picked
down
her.
for her.
Tessa
For a
was
few
the
minutes we
person
stuck
whose
to
laugh
safe
you heard
ground.
before you found
Coffee,
the crowd.
toast,
She
my
told
sorry
stories
eggs,
with every
her mom's
muscle in her
flickering
face.
porch light,
Reached
Katie's
across the
habit
table
of
to
sending
swipe
3
your
texts
fries,
where a single
and
one would
informed
do
you
fine.
in the same
Then
breath that
Tessa
your
laid
playlist
her
was a
fork
war
down.
crime.
I haven't
At 27,
forgotten the
she'd
second of
packed
last
up
night,
for
she
Chicago.
said.
I switched
Landed
off
a
the
job
burner.
doing brand
Okay.
work.
She
and
looked
gotten
at me.
herself
That's the
engaged
whole
to a man
response.
called Grant.
Depends what you're
a guy
hoping
with
I'll
a
say.
costly watch.
Her mouth
and the look of
flickered
somebody
toward
who
a
had
smile
never
that
once
didn't
been
hold.
disappointed in
I need to know
himself.
whether you meant it.
At 32,
I didn't play dumb.
she drove
I did,
back
I
to the
said.
lake with an empty
She dropped her
passenger
gaze
seat.
to her hands.
I only knew any
The
of
part
it
about
because
wanting
Katie
me.
phoned me before
Yes.
8 on a Thursday.
The part where it wasn't
and opened
pity
with
talking.
whatever you do.
Yes.
Don't say
The part where
something
you
dumb
told
the
me,
first time you see
I'm not
her.
any less a
That's
woman
an
for
oddly
it.
precise
I came around
thing
the
to be
counter
told.
slowly.
She sat up
stopped
over at her
close to
mom's
her,
for now and
and
waited until she looked
something
up.
in Katie's
That part
tone
most of
bent.
all.
There was a
Her
surgery,
eyes welled again.
and Grant
but
is
this
out of the
time
picture.
she didn't
That
seem
straightened me
ashamed
up.
of it.
Surgery
I
for
counted
what?
that as ground
A pause
game.
on her end.
I'm
Breast
frightened,
cancer,
she whispered.
Early enough
I know.
that she got
I'm
lucky,
really frightened.
but the whole
because if I
thing
let
put her
myself
through the
trust
ringer.
you,
She's not
and then
handing
some
out the
morning you look at
specifics.
me like you did.
So zip it.
I can't swear I'll
act
never
like a
get
normal
anything
human.
wrong.
Act
I
normal.
said, keeping it
Folks
gentle.
toss that off like
But
it
I can
costs
swear I won't
nothing.
feed you a
It
lie.
costs plenty.
Just to look
Now
better
when a
than
person
I am.
you used to be
I
able
want
to
to truly know
identify
you.
by her
I want to
laugh
make a
alone.
life
Comes home
alongside
hauling
you.
something,
And none of that
so
hinges
heavy,
on you
it warps the
rewinding
room
into
she
whoever
stands in.
you used to be.
I ran into her that
She shut
same
her eyes a
afternoon
second
in her mother's
when they
driveway.
opened.
Something
One
in her
car
had loosened,
door hanging open,
not mended,
two moving
mending
boxes
runs
stacked
slower than
against her
that,
chest.
but loosened.
The hair
Can
that
we
used
take
to
it
fall
slow?
dark
She
past her
asked.
shoulder blades
I
was
grinned.
cropped short
Tessa,
now, and
I
just
rebuild
below
boat
her
docks
ears.
for a living.
Still
Slow's
lovely,
practically
only
my
changed.
whole reputation.
She'd gone thinner.
That pulled a real
too.
laugh out of her.
The angles
The one
of her
I've been
more
missing.
pronounced, the kind that
And her
warmed the
expression
entire
carried a
kitchen.
wariness
So
I
slow
couldn't
as what we
remember
did.
ever
That
seeing
first
on her.
week, she
Nothing
caught sight of me
formally
coming up the
changed while
drive
everything
and
quietly
produced a
did.
smile.
She
so
kept turning up at
rehearsed
the
it
shop
made
with
my
coffee.
chest ache.
I kept walking her
Hey there,
home
Rhodes.
after dark.
Still my last
We talked
name.
with more honesty
Still like
than
we were
our childhoods
17
had
and
ever
mouthing
allowed.
off in the school
And
locker.
somehow,
with
I
our
lifted the
defenses
boxes
lower
out of
than
her
they'd
arms
been in all our
before
grown
she
years.
could argue the
A
point.
couple of weeks
Stay
on,
back.
I took her out
Word
for
is
a
you're a
proper
real
evening.
grown-up,
Not
living on
because
your
we
own
needed
now.
the ceremony of it,
Hardly.
but because she'd
I'm
earned
subletting
being
a
wanted
corner
in
of
plain
adulthood
daylight
by the month.
I collected her
That
at
earned me
7,
an actual
showed
smile.
up with flowers
Little,
since
but
Katie had
genuine.
promised violence
I take whatever
otherwise,
she gave me.
and steered
The
us
house
to a
on the
little
inside
Italian spot
smelled like
where nobody had a clue
cardboard
about our
and money
history.
spray.
And
She'd only
nobody eyed
bothered
her like a
unpacking
survivor
the
of essentials so far.
To them, she was
one
just
lamp
Tessa,
glowing in
which
a
was the
corner,
entire point.
a mug half
Afterward,
drunk
we
on the
walked
counter,
along the shoreline,
and a row of
She was
prescription
quiet a
bottles
while,
by the sink,
then threaded her
arranged
fingers
with
through
careful
mine,
exactness
like
as
she was
somebody
announcing
working
a decision
overtime,
out loud.
just to stay level.
I kept bracing
I put
to
the boxes
feel
down
wrecked
and
tonight.
told her,
She
just
said,
aim me at whatever's
and she tipped
left.
her face
I've
up to
got
mine.
it. That's
Mostly
not what I
felt
said.
was nervous.
She answered
because I was liking
her
you way
eyes
too much.
sliding to mine.
That sentence
taking a measurement
took me apart
then
more
fine.
thoroughly.
The bookcase,
than any polished
the bookcase
confession
became
ever
the sofa.
could. I
The
halted
sofa
on the
became a
path.
pair of
She
kitchen
halted with
chairs.
me.
She claimed
Just then,
she could handle.
neither
on
one
her
of us
own.
grabbed for
An
a
hour
punchline.
in,
I
was
cupped her
fighting
face,
a painted shut
waited
window
for the
in the
smallest
spare room,
nod, while
and then I
Tessa
kissed her,
hovered behind
slow
me,
and careful,
contributing
not to
narration
prove I
of
wanted her,
no earthly
not to scrub
use.
away what came
You've
before.
always needed to
Only
feel
like I'd
handy.
finally earned
I am
the right
handy.
to find
You're
her here
pushy.
in the present.
You're welcome.
And meant
Another
to get it
small
right.
smile.
When we
pried
drew
loose.
apart, she
By
had
the time I
tears
headed
again.
out,
She'd
but this
folded
time
herself
smile
onto the
came
living
with it.
room floor.
Something about that
ringed
felt
by
new.
framed
She
pictures she
whispered.
couldn't decide
Good.
whether to
New.
display or bury.
She gave a nod.
One was left
New
over
memory.
from the engagement session.
New.
I could
That
tell
became the
because
phrase we
Grant
lived
was
by.
in it, grinning
New
like
memory.
a man selling
The first time she
wristwatches.
slipped back into
the
a
second
fitted
she noticed me
dress,
clock it,
not out of
she
obligation,
flipped the
but
frame
because she
face
felt
down.
like it.
I acted like I
she let me get a
photo of her
across the next
in the shop
fortnight.
doorway.
I laid
The
eyes
whole
on her
lake
more
spread
than
out
I had
behind
her.
a stretch of years.
The first morning
At
she
the start, it was
surfaced at my
only
place,
because
swiped
Katie
my
kept
sweatshirt off
feeding
the
me
back
into
of
a
it.
chair.
Go make
and
sure her
declared,
porch bulb
"This is
works.
mine now.
Run this
on
over to her.
emotional and
She's
legal
got mulch
grounds.
that won't carry
7 months
itself.
in, Grant
Real
tried
slick,
calling.
my sister.
She glanced
But
at the
before
screen,
long, Katie
let it buzz
didn't
a
need a
single
prod me
time
at all.
and held
Tessa
the
took to
phone
dropping
out
by
to
the
me.
shop.
Not
with
that
2
she wanted me
coffees.
answering it.
I took to
Only
quietly
that it had
repairing
stopped
odds
holding any pull
and
on her.
ends at her mom's
Then
place.
she declined it with
that
her
she
own
swore
phone.
up and down
After
she could manage
she told
solo.
me.
I think I
We
just
fell
chose
into
my
a
voice
groove
instead
far
of his.
too fast.
I kissed the top of her head and said,
That should have set
"Long
off more
overdue."
alarms in me.
He didn't try again.
The humor
and
was
neither of us
intact.
wasted
The sharp
one more
edges
night
too,
thinking about him.
and she could still
18
string
months
together
on,
a full
the
sentence
2 of us
insult.
took a small
While
house
passing
with
me a
leaning
muffin
front
she'd pulled
porch
from the oven
and a
that
kitchen she
morning.
swore
But the
was
crack
full
showed
of deeply
a harmless
fixable
question
potential.
like,
So
"What's
under
your
front
front window
window,
staying
I put
long
together a reading
would make her
bench
wince.
for her. She kept
Tilted
to loose shirts
so the
even
water
once
stayed
the
in her
afternoons
view.
warmed up.
She painted that
She was
room
careful
yellow,
never to
even
change
after
where
I
a
warned
window
her
could
see
see
her.
her.
Daring call.
And whenever
She told me
Grant's
daring
name
calls have
surfaced
been
on her
paying
phone,
off for her lately.
buried in some
3 years
email,
out chain,
I proposed
she'd
in that
never
very
gotten
kitchen.
around to trashing.
No audience.
A little of the
No
light
stage
went out of her
spectacle.
face. Just
I let
Tessa
it
barefoot
sit,
botching
not
a
because
batch
I
of
wasn't
pancakes,
curious,
and me
but
understanding
because I
that I
figured
didn't want a
she'd tell
single
me
plain
once
warning
the telling belonged
that didn't
to her.
have her in it.
That night
She said
arrived on
yes
a Sunday.
before I'd finished.
Katie had gone
then
out
made me
somewhere.
finish anyway.
I was locking up the
because
shop
in her
when I
opinion, a
spotted
woman
Tessa
is owed the entire
off by herself
speech.
on her mother's back
She was
steps.
right, so she
One
got
knee
it.
hugged her
We
chest.
married in my sister's
a blanket
backyard
draped
beneath a
over
string
her,
of
even though
lights,
the evening
with Katie
wasn't
sobbing
nearly
loud
cold
enough to
her in it.
embarrass herself.
She raised her eyes
and
as I
Tessa
let myself
laughing
in the gate.
halfway.
"You got any
through
wine
her
on you?"
vows,
she asked.
because joy
that
still
kind of night,
took her by surprise.
a thin,
now
cracked
and then.
laugh. And the best of it
written on my
wasn't that she
face?
turned back
I
into
came
the
back
old
about
Tessa.
10 minutes on.
She did
carrying a bottle.
She became someone
two
with more
glasses
depth,
that didn't match.
funny and a quieter
and a fairly
key,
loud instinct
kinder to
that whatever
herself,
was coming.
fierce
carried
about
more
the small
weight
good
than
things.
either of us was
A
letting
woman
on.
who'd been hurt,
She
yes,
sipped
but
once,
never made
fixed her
smaller.
gaze on the black
Never
yard,
made smaller,
and said,
"Years down
"Can
the
I put
road,
a question to
whenever
you?
somebody asked
Can
at
you
what
skip the
moment I known I
gentle,
loved her,
careful
I
answer
never
for
reached
once?
for the wedding or
I
the
settled
first
against
kiss
the porch
or that
railing
first dinner.
and studied her.
My mind went
Have
to
you
that
ever known
kitchen,
me to have that
to her
kind of
standing on the
self-control?
tile,
That
terrified
drew a
she'd
warmer
never
laugh
be
out of
wanted,
her,
though
and
about the
burned
step I
off
took and the
quickly.
truth I
She
told.
set the glass down,
because that was the
drew the
spot
blanket
where
in
our whole
closer,
life
and
actually
said,
started.
barely above a
So let me
breath,
put it to you.
"Owen,
What would you have done
when you look at me
if
these
a person you
days,
loved was
what is it
standing
you
in your
actually
kitchen,
see?"
bearing the exact
There was no
part
safe
of
reply to
herself she was
that.
most afraid
She hadn't
would
said
send
it
you
as a
running,
trap, and
but
telling you
no
nobody
simple
could want her
sentence was
and
going
have you
hold
ever
up
had to
under what she
relearn
was
that you were
really
still
after.
worth loving?
She wasn't fishing
someone
about the
talked you
haircut.
out of believing it?
She wasn't
Tell me your
fishing
story
about the
down in the
shadows
comments.
under her eyes.
If this one stuck
She
with
was
you,
asking
leave a
me
like
whether
and
the
hit
thing that had
subscribe,
happened to her
and
was
I'll
now
meet
the
you in the
first
next one.
thing every set of eyes landed on. So I didn't rush it.